Welcome to Aspire, and I Have the Right To podcast, where we amplify voices, share stories, and drive change in the fight against sexual assault. We explore the critical issues surrounding student safety, institutional accountability, and survivor empowerment. In every episode, our goal is to provide insightful conversations with survivors, experts, educators, and advocates, giving you, our listener, valuable information, resources, and actionable steps to create safer environments and cultivate a culture of respect and consent.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Aspire. I'm Chessy Prout, co-founder of I Have the Right To.
And I'm Shipp, executive director at I Have the Right To. We're so glad you're here with us.
At Aspire and through our work at I Have the Right To, we know that the voices of young people are essential. Students are at the heart of this movement. Their courage, questions, and leadership will be what truly changes the world. That's why we make sure student voices are a part of these conversations.
Today, we're excited to introduce Maria, who will be co-hosting with us today. Maria is a student at Georgetown University and is interning with I Have the Right To. She will be adding her perspective and questions throughout the episode. Maria represents exactly why we do this work, to empower the next generation to lead with empathy, accountability, and vision.
And we are honored to welcome our guest today, Tracy DeTomasi. Tracy is the CEO of Callisto and a licensed clinical social worker whose leadership and innovation have shaped this movement for over 2 decades. From launching MEND at the YWCA to leading No More, co-founding the Good People Collective, and working globally to change laws and cultures, Tracy has built programs and tools that are transforming how we approach prevention and survivor support. We can't wait to hear her insights on engaging men, building peer accountability, and creating a culture of safety and respect. Tracy, Maria, welcome to the podcast. We're so glad to have you both with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Tracy, I'd love to start with you. You have had such a diverse career, from working with youth offenders to leading national and global advocacy initiatives. What was it that drew you to this work initially, and how has your perspective on this issue and the culture that we live in shifted over the years?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people in this work have one easy answer to that question, and I don't. I did an internship in college where I worked with adolescent boys in a group home, and I recognized how abuse can impact families and can impact individuals, and that's what really got me into it. And because when I did it, and I would tell people what I did, they would tell me their story, and often it was started with, I've never told this before, but. And I just, at a very young age, understood how pervasive this issue was. And the longer I did it, the more I recognized that I had family members that had experienced it. I had some of my best friends had experienced it. And it just kept me going. And then I went to grad school to become a therapist because I always had wanted to do something that helped people. But I really got into gender-based violence because I think it really called to me, to be honest, as cheesy as that can sound. But throughout the years of doing this work and the decades of doing this work, it's changed so much. The culture has definitely shifted from when I started in college in the late 90s, mostly for the better, but not always. And I think that there's so much that we still have to do. But I was about 18 years into my career when Me Too happened. And I remember people tagging me on Facebook and saying, Tracy, look at this. And I was like, what's this hashtag? And then I looked up the hashtag and I was like, yeah, so I know all these stories. I know all of your stories that are tagging me in this. And of course, this isn't surprising to me at all. And it made me realize for the first time, because I was so in the work, that people were telling me their stories, but they weren't telling everybody else in their life their story. And it was really a watershed moment, and my work changed because after Me Too, I did not have to convince people that the statistics were real. Before that, we always had to start with 1 in 5 women, 1 in 4 women, depending on what statistic you were talking about. And we would get questions about, is that the case? And I said, ask the women in your life. And when men in particular would ask the women in their life, they would understand how we don't talk to men about this. And so there's been so much change along the way. but it's a net positive overall.
So I'd love to hear about your work that you're doing now at Callisto. It's such important work. So if you could just share with our listeners how Callisto got started, what your mission is, the app, and what you've been up to.
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about Callisto. As you can imagine, burnout is an easy thing to do in this field. And so I tried to actually get out of gender-based violence several years ago. And Callisto was what brought me back because it's such innovative technology that I believe in it. And I believe that it can really change the numbers that we see. So at Callisto, we're a national nonprofit, and we have built encrypted technology to help connect survivors of sexual violence. So often when people are assaulted, they wonder, am I the only one? Did this person do this to somebody else? And we have built technology where survivors can find that information out without having to publicly identify. And so what they do is anybody in the US and its territories with a .edu email address has free access to our site. You can go to callistovault.org to access it. And if you're a survivor, you put in the state where the assault occurred, and that's because sexual assault laws vary by state. And then you put in a unique identifier of your perpetrator. So your perpetrator's social media handle, email address, or phone number. We don't use names because names are not unique enough. And then you wait for a match after consenting to be contacted. And so if two people put in the same Instagram handle, let's say, of the perpetrator, there's going to be a match. It's not like a dating site, so you're not going to know right away. What happens is we get notified, but we have still kept the information about the survivor and the perpetrator encrypted to us. So we just see a unique case number for that. And that is because we don't want to be accused of defamation, and we want to make sure to protect the survivor information as much as possible. We then assign the case to a survivor advocate who is legally protected under confidentiality, and they reach out to the survivor separately to say, there's been a match in Callisto's system. Did you want to talk to somebody? If they want to talk to somebody, the survivor has the option. Throughout this whole process, we make sure that survivors are in the driving seat, and then they talk to that advocate and tell them what happened. And that's the first time they have to say what happened to them. And they go over their options. What's a criminal option? What's a civil option? What's a Title IX option? What's a mental health option? Whatever the case may be. And then if it's safe to do so after going through the risks and the survivor's consent, that advocate will work to connect those survivors so they can pursue healing and justice on their own. So we are not a database that people can sort through. We are not a warning system, and we don't investigate what happened. We are really putting that power back to survivors so they can make the best decision for them. We know that reporting sexual assault, so many people think it's like an episode of Law and Order SVU. It is nothing like that. As Chessy, I know that you have been through, unfortunately, and you can talk about that. And so we're making sure that survivors have their options before they do that. Or if they have reported and it didn't go anywhere, because that often happens too, there's another option. Because you can see in the Me Too movement that when survivors are connected, they have a different path to accountability. They're believed, they're more likely to be believed, which is unfortunate but true. And they have more levels of accountability, whether that's civil court, criminal court, or just the court of popular opinion, as in the case of some celebrities that were called out during Me Too.
So, Tracy, with Callisto's work specifically, what excites you the most about the tools you're building for survivors and communities? And also, how does it support survivors, and what is the big picture or impact that it has?
Yeah, that's a lot. So I think that I'm excited the most. And like I said, this really brought me back into gender-based violence because it's a solution. So often the work that we have done of sexual assault prevention is about telling women not to get raped. And this is really going to the source of serial perpetrators and telling them not to rape and holding them accountable. So On average, 90% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by serial perpetrators who on average offend 6 times while in college. So if we can identify a serial perpetrator after 2 assaults versus 6, which 2 assaults is too many, 1 assault is too many, but if we can identify them and hold them accountable, that reduces sexual assault on college campuses by 59%. And it is something that the technology doesn't exist anywhere except for Callisto. And so the fact that we can have an option for survivors to find each other in a very confidential, survivor-focused, trauma-informed way, that they don't have to go to journalists who are doing this work now, that's what's the most exciting to me, that we can give survivors the opportunity to heal in different ways, but we also have that level of accountability. I worked with adolescent sex offenders for several years at the beginning of my career, and I know that treatment can be effective. I know that intervention can be effective, but we don't have good ways of identifying them yet. We would love to rely on the criminal justice system, and it's not working. If you think about high-profile cases such as Larry Nassar, who was the USA gymnastics doctor. Somebody reported him to Title IX at Michigan State University on several occasions in the early 2000s. They reported him to police on multiple occasions. It took a survivor, Rachel Den Hollander, to go forward with the journalist and to name herself in an article, a news article, to be able to get other survivors to trust that what happened to them was also sexual assault. And then that's what we saw in 2016 or 2017, whenever it was, that he was finally held accountable, and he had sexually assaulted hundreds of girls and women at that point. So the systems are not working, and we are finding a different way for them to be able to do, again, what journalists are doing. And so I'm trying to think back to your question, if there's anything else that I need to answer in that.
One thing I was just going to say as a follow-up to what you just said, Tracy, I also think it's so important, just from my work litigating these cases. A lot of times survivors don't necessarily want to come forward until they know that there's other people with them. Like, there's the thought of, it just happened to me, or, it's scary. It's scary to do it alone. But then when you hear other survivors, so many of my clients didn't come forward until they learned of other people going through the same thing. And I think that that's like such important work that Callisto is doing, is letting you know, like, you aren't alone, and that there are other people being impacted by it. And it can maybe change whether or not they want to report based on who else is this happening to.
I completely agree with that, because if you read the book She Said or watch the movie, which is based on the article that Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey wrote about Weinstein, that kind of broke that case wide open, even though so many people knew about it. But that was really the article in the New York Times that broke that case open. And in the book and the movie She Said, they talk about how the survivors aren't going to jump unless they know they can jump together. They're not going to risk that. And I've talked to one of the survivors that book is written about, is Rowena Chu, who is on our board of directors. And she's talked about that, how it's not safe for one person to be the target, particularly in those high profile cases. But even in not high profile cases, if there's money, if the perpetrator has money or is connected to money or clout or anything else, they have the power. They have the power. I mean, we talked to the Epstein survivors, and if you listen to some of the stuff on the rally several weeks ago, they said that the perpetrators can sue them into homelessness. And that is a reality for a lot of survivors, that they're wondering, what is the consequences to them? And we've seen that over and over and over. And yet we have the power of numbers, and we create that. Our technology helps to create that without having to disclose in any other way.
Amazing. Tracy, I'm also curious, does Gen Z have a role in the work being done at Callisto? My generation has a really big impact in the social media sphere and the tech sphere, especially with the rise of AI, and we've basically just grown up with social media all around us. Are they a group that you look to when progressing Callisto, and how can they help spread the word and join in on this work?
Absolutely. We cannot do this work with college students without Gen Z present. So we have a program called Callisto ambassadors, and they are volunteers from college campuses that can volunteer to spread the word on their campus. We provide them with training and with flyers and with information and things that they need to be able to hand out on their campuses. We also have ways for students to get involved through social media. One of our favorite ambassadors was Ray Epstein, who I know she has been involved with I Have the Right To, and she's amazing. And when she does posts about Callisto and what Callisto is, we get so many more followers because people want to trust her and her generation more than they want to trust me. You know, I look like a mom to them. I look like, I would love to think that I look like an older sister, but in reality, it's not me that young people are going to trust. It's going to be their peers. And so we want, several years ago, a survivor said to us, we need at least one person in every friend group to know about Callisto. And we couldn't agree more because talking about sexual assault is complex. And people don't want to do it. They don't think that they have a problem with it. They're embarrassed by it. They may feel like if they've been victimized, that there's a target on them and that everybody can see it, even if they can't. And so it requires Gen Z to be involved. The language is different from Gen Z. I'm Gen X, so the language is different. And so we absolutely rely on Gen Z to tell us how they talk about it. We have learned from Ray and from her friends and from other ambassadors of like, oh, you guys talked about it that way. That's great. Let's change our language. And so we are getting language from Gen Z all the time about how to spread the word about this.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. I also wanted to ask that it's clear that running Callisto is a very tough but rewarding endeavor. How do you like to practice self-care and take care of your team at the same time as the CEO?
Yeah, self-care is very important for our team. We talk about it a lot. As a team, we're really supportive of each other, of having mental health days and recognizing that survivors on our team have anniversaries of when they were assaulted and taking the day off if they need to do that. But I think, personally, I rely on therapy. I think therapy is a really good version of self-care. It's not just all bathtubs and bubbles and wine and chocolate and whatever. So yeah, I make sure that I'm taking care of myself because if I don't, I can't do this work. I have to take the time off. I have to step away. There was, with all of the chaos of 2025, there was a TikTok, I think it was, that I saw about people talking about the AIDS movement in the 80s. And they said that in the mornings, they buried their friends. In the afternoons, they protested. And at night, they danced. And the dancing was just as important as the protesting because you have to refuel yourself. And so, I make sure to have a really good group of friends. I make sure to step away from my computer and not pretend that I can do this for 24 hours a day. I give myself permission because when I was a young social worker, I didn't. And it was an easy way to burn out of I have to solve the world's problems today. We are on a super, super long path. We are on a marathon. We are not on a sprint. And when you sprint in this field, you burn yourself out really quickly. And so self-care is so, so, so important. And recognizing when I'm triggered, recognizing when the news cycle is too much, recognizing when I just need to watch puppy and kitten videos on Instagram and just step away from all the other garbage that's on there, even though I want to be informed. And I think that just giving myself permission to do that is really important.
That gave me goosebumps, the fact that they danced at night, because I think that that's something I needed to learn on my own path is you have to take time for yourself and not to feel guilty about it. Because like you said, it's a long journey ahead of us and we have to have energy and we have to have friends and community around us. So I think that's just so important to know. And it's something I wish I would have learned earlier on.
Yeah. And I think that having people in this work and having those folks who understand it is important too. I mean, Chessy, when you and I and your mom hung out, it was so fulfilling for me because that you're not in this work alone and that you have that Callisto has I Have the Right To, has End Rape on Campus, has all of these other organizations that are also in this fight, and we're not alone. And so what we're trying to do with Callisto's technology of connecting survivors is exactly what we need to do as the organizations and the leaders in this field, because we also need that same connection.
Right. And it's so exciting to hear you talk about or hear it expressed through what you're talking about Callisto. The idea of community seems to be the basis of, the technology itself, and then with the way that you treat the team and then the space in general, that we're all a part of a community. I think community is so integral to any sort of change and then any sort of healing too that can happen. I think it was so powerful too to hear you say that Callisto is that sort of version of going to a journalist with a highly recognized perpetrator, but for anybody. Just because somebody's perpetrator is especially powerful or well-known doesn't mean that they are more deserving of justice. And that's something that I feel really strongly about and really appreciate the fact that that is what Callisto does, is helps survivors everywhere and anywhere come together through community to find justice, healing, support. And so I wanted to ask you about this space in general. Are there any other technology-based initiatives that you are excited about or that are on the horizon to help combat sexual assault and rape culture?
That's a good question. I think technology in this space is challenging because of it can be used so inappropriately by abusers. And that's why we have been slow to roll out. It's why we've been at it for a long time. And it's why we're as encrypted as we are. And sometimes we don't have the data that we need to fundraise, which is unfortunate. And we find ways around that as much as possible. But it is really challenging. I know that End Rape on Campus, who I think that you all are connected to, has this really great tool called the Campus Mapping and Accountability Tool that can show what universities are doing as far as their Title IX and their services to survivors. And I think that that's a really great technology for that. I'm not really sure of other technology that's coming up right now. I know that AI is really big, and we are choosing not to use AI because we don't know. It hasn't been proven to be trauma-informed yet. And so we're not going to experiment on survivors to figure that out. There are other people that are going to do that, and they may have success and they may not, but that is not something that we're choosing to do. But I will say that at Callisto, we are trying to expand beyond college campuses. And that's our next endeavor we know that sexual assault is not a campus problem. It is an everywhere problem, particularly when there are structures of different power structures involved. And so we are actively looking to secure funding to be able to create a pilot to expand. And we're hoping to have something launched in 2026.
Wow, that's exciting and so powerful. Because right now you said you have to have the .edu, so it's 18 and over and with a college email address. And like you said, there's so many people, younger and older than that group of individuals, that I think could benefit from this app so much. I mean, I had clients who came forward in their 80s when they found out that they were part of a survivor community. So that's really exciting for me to hear that it's going to expand, and I look forward to seeing that. So you've been at this for a while now. What do you see as the most pressing gaps in the movement to end sexual violence now? And where do you think we should be directing our energy, just in general, like the movement as a whole? I know that's a big question, but are there any areas where you're thinking like this is where we need to focus?
Yeah, I think there's so many. There's just so many.
Fair.
I think we have to get men more involved, which I think, you all are doing. I have worked with boys for the first 15 years of my career. I've worked with a lot of men. I've developed programs to get men more involved. But as women, we cannot solve this on our own. Not to mention, men are assaulted too. And I don't even think that we understand the numbers of the assaults that happen with men and with boys, because they're not reporting, they're not identifying it as sexual assault. And a lot of the marketing, so to say, and outreach, and even resources are really focused towards women. And so I think that particularly of my generation, we didn't tell our dads. It wasn't safe to tell our dads because I know I love my father. And if I would have told him I was sexually assaulted, he would have killed the person. And I think that that's a real fear. And having to think about how to respond to your parents' feelings when you are a teenager. And I know, Chessy, you went through that. And like, how do you handle that? And so I think that dads of a different generation have changed that. And I think that they're getting better, but we still need to educate them so they understand how big of an issue it is. I think that education is another thing that we need to tackle, which is what you guys are doing beautifully, is that there's still so much misunderstanding about sexual assault. And I think that right now it's getting worse with the manosphere and the statistics and the fake news and all of that stuff. And it's hard to combat. But the male loneliness epidemic is part of that, of why we need to invite them into the conversation and to understand their issues, because those men become offenders. And sometimes they've been offended, especially as children, by women. And so we really need to address this holistically. But education is really complex. I have said for over a decade, we need to learn how to talk about sex with our clothes on before we can talk about it with our clothes off. And sex education in our society is terrible. We need to have positive and sexuality conversations that are inclusive to everybody, with LGBTQ folks, with people with disabilities. And I think that is a form of prevention that we're not talking about, because so often we just don't want to talk about sex. And that is another thing I would tackle. And the one other important thing that I think is really important for your audience to hear is funding. You know this, Katie. Like, you both know this. Funding in this space is really challenging. We don't fit in most buckets, and people don't understand the challenges of not-for-profit organizations and how we get funding. And so out of all philanthropic funding in the U.S., less than 2% year after year goes to women and girls issues. And women and girls issues include reproductive rights. It includes girls who code. It includes breast cancer research. So you think about Susan G. Komen, that is all in that less than 2% bucket. Gender-based violence and then programs for Black and brown girls is even smaller. And their sexual assault in general has a stigma. You don't want to talk about it. People want to help save the children for trafficking and for child sexual abuse, which is extremely important. And I don't want there to be a competition of who deserves more funding. I think that just more funding needs to be had in general. And there's plenty of funding out there. There's plenty of people out there that are able to give and willing to give, and they just don't know, because as you all know, our ads get blocked on Meta. We can't do the same things that for-profits do. We can't do the same things that a lot of other nonprofits do, because survivors who are our target audience don't want to follow us. It's triggering. They don't want to think about sexual assault. They don't identify as being a sexual assault victim, sometimes until decades later. And so I think that all of this is about educating people and getting through those barriers, which is extremely challenging. I don't think that most people realize that one like to your social media or our social media is huge for engagement. One share. I've had family members recently tell me that my posts that I share constantly have changed what their healing has been, and that they were assaulted as children or as teenagers. And I never knew. And these are like family, these are cousins of mine that several have come forward to me in the last year that I had no idea. But they said, your posting gives me light. And so anybody can do that, because you don't know who's watching. So I think I kind of went on a little bit of a tangent. I can get on that soapbox for hours every day of the week if you let me.
That's what podcasts are for, though. We need all the soapboxes in the world. That's why we have this platform. But no, it's so amazing to hear you talk about the different sort of barriers, and then also ways that are actually working for organizations like ours. for actual people. And I fall into that bucket of sometimes on social media, when I see posts from organizations like ours, it can be kind of not super triggering per se, but it's like always a reminder, like, oh yeah, that happened to me. And, sometimes I go on Instagram to forget about all my responsibilities. And so, in some roundabout way, it's actually helping me be more productive by not wanting to go on Instagram. But I do think that awareness is key, and social media awareness by organizations like I Have the Right to and Callisto can really help, or should be there to really help change the tide of the messages that are seen on social media. And of course, we all know that our algorithms are so specified to what we like, what we see, what we share, what we send. So we can kind of be stuck in a little bit of a bubble. But that's one question that I like to ask anybody who works in this space. And I know we've talked a little bit about barriers already, but what gives? What gives when we go into schools and parents will pull their children out of sessions talking about consent and healthy relationships? Why are people so adverse to giving to organizations that help to either prevent sexual assault or support survivors? Part of my mind goes, well, maybe they're thinking, well, I'm not scot-free. I don't get off scot-free on this issue, so maybe I shouldn't give money because then that'll call attention to me. I don't know. But what is your perspective on getting people to kind of shed that veneer of, well, we don't want to even touch this issue with a 10-foot pole, and getting them to really understand that the statistics, that this affects so many people. And if we all work together a tiny bit, we can change the world.
What a powerful question. And I think if I knew the exact answer, I would hopefully have been able to solve it a long time ago.
Right.
I think it's fear. I think part of it's fear. I think it's discomfort. I think it's trauma, where so many people have been assaulted. And then I also think that so many people think they have to get it right. And if they can't get it 100% right, then they just don't try. And so I think that often we as a field collectively have ostracized men. We've ostracized a lot of people of like, oh, well, we're policing ourselves. You can't use this language. You can't use that language, of like, that's not the best language to use, but can I teach you how to use better language? And I think that sometimes works better, but I think that there's so much emotion in this topic for everybody. And I think, especially with Callisto, we bring offenders into the conversation. So people are a lot more comfortable when you're just talking about victims and survivors and how to help them heal and how to help women protect themselves. And when all of a sudden you switch the conversation to, we're going to hold this group of people accountable, mostly men and boys, because they're about 98% of offenders, they start thinking about their sons, their uncles, their fathers, the people that they know that have assaulted other people in the family. And they worry about that. There's a worry about false accusations, even though we know that they're from, anywhere from 2 to 8%, depending on the study that you look at. And what I say when I'm talking to particularly parents of, you're worried about your daughters, and now you're worried about your sons being falsely accused. But what you're not worried about is the reality, and that is that your boys are more likely to be sexually assaulted in college than they are to be falsely accused. But we're not talking about that. And so I think that a lot of it, the barriers to support and the barriers are all of this are fear. They worry, I've talked to a lot of parents who mean really, really well. And they're like, well, I can't say that to my kids about sex. And you're like, why not? They're going to learn it somewhere. And right now they're learning it on TikTok. They're learning it on YouTube. They're learning it somewhere. So you need to have a conversation with them. I know I am the person that when any of my friends had a newborn and they had a baby shower, I would buy boundary books, like age-appropriate boundary books, and they're like, you are weird. And then they would go, oh my goodness, this was so helpful because I had no idea how to talk to my 3-year-old about this. And then that has led to some of these kids that I know that I gave them to this, when their moms were pregnant and now they're 15 years old and they're like, oh, now I'm more prepared for the conversation. We just are uncomfortable talking about sex, and sexual assault falls into that. There's a lot of religious stigma around it as well. That people have a hard time talking about it. I was not raised to talk about sex, and my family still doesn't fully understand what I do. And when I have tried to talk to my nieces about sex, like my sister was like, you talk to them because I'm not doing that. I'm like, great, bring them here. We'll make some popcorn, because we need to normalize it. We need to normalize that sex can be fun and it can feel good and it is enjoyable. And if we don't teach that, you don't know the other side of it. You don't know that what you experienced is not right because you never talked about what was right. And if we're just saying that it's abstinence-only sex education, that's not realistic. That is absolutely not realistic. I don't know the percentages, but most people, I think, are having sex before marriage. So let's stop pretending that is a thing. Let's do reality.
It's so important to have those conversations. I, too, am buying those books for every shower that I go to. And honestly, usually for every birthday party that I go to as well. As kids get older, I just find the book that is for that age group and I give it to them. Because it really, until we take the stigma out of talking about sex, there's going to remain the stigma around sexual assault, right? Like when I would talk to my clients who are abused decades ago, I would say, what did you tell anybody, right? Because we're looking for witnesses, et cetera. And they said, no. They said, you did not talk about this ever in any capacity until we start to talk about it in like an empowering way and not a scary way, it's going to remain in the shadows. And it's also, I think, fear as well. Like parents, it's so scary to admit that this happens because then they want to know how to protect their kids. And it's not an easy way to say, okay, this is how you protect your kids. It's multifaceted how we protect our kids. And a lot of it is empowering our kids and having conversations with our kids. And so I think that we just have to take the fear out of it and also give those resources to parents. Like, yeah, it is scary that this stuff happens, but there are things that you can do to empower your kids. And there are things that you can pay attention to make them feel more secure in talking to you about it and creating safer environments around them. But yeah, I think so much of it goes back to fear. But I do think that things are changing. I try to remind myself when I first started doing this work and I told people about it, they did not want to talk about it. And now when I tell parents, like my neighbors, they actually say like, oh, tell me more about that. Or, oh, maybe you can come into my kids' school. So in ways we are seeing progress and in ways we're backsliding a bit. But either way, like you said, we're in it for the long haul. We're just going to keep going.
Yeah. And I will say that, I've been on numerous podcasts in the last year. And when I typically got on with a male host, they'll say, well, what can we do? What can we talk to our daughters about of how to protect them? And I said, your daughters are as protected as they're going to get. What are you doing with your sons? Because I think that is the next flip that we need to do. We cannot, all of the safety list that happens of like, cover your drink, don't run at night by yourself, don't do this, don't do that, don't wear revealing clothing, all of this stuff. It becomes victim blaming, because what happens if I didn't cover my drink? What happens if I was wearing something too short? What happens if I was doing all of these things? Then it's my fault. I shouldn't have done this and I had a responsibility in it, which is not true at all. It's absolutely not true. And really, the safety list doesn't prevent sexual assault. It reduces one person's individual risk of sexual assault. So the offender is just going to assault somebody else. They might not assault you, but they're going to assault somebody else. So if we really want to prevent sexual assault, we have to go with who's assaulting. We have to look at the perpetrators. But then that means we have to understand that our friends and family are perpetrators. And as soon, like when you talk about cancer awareness, everybody can say, I'm anti-cancer. and you can talk about that, and there's not a stigma around it most of the time. And when you talk about sexual assault, if we're just looking at the victims, that's a little bit safer. But when you start to point fingers at the perpetrators, that is when everything shuts down. And that is the next hurdle that we need to get over, is focusing on our boys to understand what consent is, because our girls understand what consent is. Our boys do not. This is a generalization, of course. And I think just continuing to do the work that you all are doing of educating on all levels is so important and needed.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with the fact that we need everybody to understand what consent means at a very, very young age. And I feel like I can already imagine the sort of tensions that could bring up in a family that's used to being super affectionate, or, in different cultural settings too. But I mean, I agree that we need to focus the shift on men and boys. And I'm like baffled. I have no idea what that would look like. I had a ton of male peers, at the school where I was assaulted, and the game that the boys had played of sort of statutory rape at the school was so ingrained in the culture. But the tough thing is that a lot of these boys that were perpetrators were the good kids. They were the bright students, the golden boys, the people who knew how to talk to parents. And so it gets really slippery to me when you work with people and we have conversations about this issue, but it's so hard to tell if the issues and the things that we're talking about are actually resonating, and if they can imagine that being translated to their lives. Because I don't think any person wants to imagine themselves as a perpetrator. And even myself, I constantly, in any sort of situation that I'm in with another person in an intimate setting, I'm always checking in with myself and the other person and making sure that everything is okay, because I'm terrified of overlooking somebody else's boundaries, or I don't want to, and that's just who I am. I'm constantly worried about how other people feel, just in real life everywhere. But I feel like a lot of times young men are told through media, through example, but a lot of times through media, TV, and movies, that you just take what you want and that's what's romantic. And which is why, I was so excited to get into the film and television industry, because I think there's so much room for more nuance in the art that we consume. Now, this is barring the whole issue with pornography and the sort of violence against women that conveys and portrays oftentimes. But in pop culture, my mom and I the other day, we watched a really great movie called Sorry Baby. And in it, they have one of the most beautiful portrayals of a woman's sort of sexual revolution, from dealing with the aftermath of an assault and finally taking control of her own sexuality again. And I thought that's what we need to see more of. We need to have more of these conversations when we're not sort of dealing with the worst of the worst, and really talk to kids, not kids maybe, but teenagers and people, young adults, more about bodily autonomy when it comes to intimate settings. And yeah, I really worry that parents won't be into that. But I think we're getting it from TV, movies, and online anyways. So why not bring that in through pop culture with kids? And yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this specifically, but I think that really speaks to the sort of a peer-to-peer aspect of the work that we're in. I think not all of these conversations should be just, the organizations talking to kids, organizations giving the language. I think kids really need to talk to each other to figure out what language works best for them. and, have those definitions that we're able to give them that are, researched and backed and specific. But so much of this, I feel like, needs to come from peer leaders. And so in your work with men's groups and working with young boys, are there young male leaders that you've been really proud of in the past? And can you give us some sort of like a shining light hope of, young men and what they could be?
Oh, I think that there's so many. I think that there's so many young men and not so young men that just need some education, and then they know how to go with it, right? And so numerous years ago, we had created a curriculum for boys in high school about toxic masculinity and boundaries and consent, and really what does it mean to be a man, and what are they being told? Just exactly what you said, Chessy, about the media and the movies and the music that they're intaking of what is this, and how does that, if they can't reach that level of fame and physical attributes and money and all of this, if they can't, does that mean that they're less of a man? And it doesn't, but culturally they're feeling that pressure. And so I think that one of the stories that I loved from that time was there was this group of boys, and there were a couple of like star football players in this group, and we taught them about consent and how pressuring somebody or not asking and not checking in could be really problematic. And one of them then came to us and talked to us in the group about how they were with their girlfriend and how they were making out or whatever, and then because of the class, he realized that his girlfriend wasn't super into it. So he stopped. He said, "Are you okay?" And she's like, didn't really answer. Didn't say no, but didn't say yes either. And he's like, "I don't want to do anything if you're not okay." And so she's like, "You know what? I'm really not okay." And he stopped. And then what happened next was he was able to say, "You know what? In the past, I would have said something like, 'Can I just do this?' to try to convince her to do something." And he's like, "Now I recognize that's not okay, and that can hurt her, and I don't want to hurt her." And all the other boys applauded him for not having sex. And that was like, I just remember being so proud of our team and the work that we had done to be like, this is a win. Because now this boy and his friends think it's cool to not have sex, to honor consent, to check in, to not do what they did. Because they just didn't know. I think we think kids know more about sex than they do. And every generation for 25 years that I've worked with youth, I think we think they know more than they do, and they don't, but we're not telling them the truth. And when we do share videos about what is sexual assault, what is whatever, we're showing them scenarios that are so ridiculous that they just laugh at and they cannot relate to. And they cannot relate to the nuances of how do you ask in the moment? How do you ask if you're okay with something when your clothes are off and your penis is right next to her vagina? Like how do you navigate those moments? Because we're not willing to have those conversations. And going back to kind of what you were saying about the media, I remember back in the day, my favorite movie was Say Anything. And John Cusack holds up a boombox after he's been told no numerous times. And that's romantic. And I remember having that poster on my wall in college because it was like, that seemed romantic. And now I'm like, you didn't accept no. And I think there's so many men that are just like, don't do that. That's creepy. And I've talked to, I've done presentations for 1,600 Army soldiers. And I always get guys that come up to me afterwards or ask the question in it. And they say, well, what happens if she's playing hard to get? And I said, don't play the game. Because if you don't know if she's playing hard to get or if she's telling you no, and that is a gray area that women need to work on about not playing hard to get. But if you don't know, don't risk it yourself and don't go after that woman because there's another woman that's not going to play hard to get. And that's what you need to do is stop thinking about her and start thinking about you. And I think that is really powerful. And there's another scenario of a corporate environment that I talked to a group of people at, and we were talking about sexual harassment. And some of the guys on the call said, well, what do I do if I see her, there's a situation at like a holiday party or something like that, and one guy on a different team kept bothering her, or like one of the women on their team. And they're like, women's empowerment, I can't just go up and protect her and she can do it herself. So how do I balance that? And I'm like, so this guy's problematic. Like, he seems to be bothering her. It probably prevents her from doing her work. It's making her uncomfortable. You guys all recognize that, right? And they're like, I said, why is he working there? Why not get rid of that guy and have a conversation with that guy? Don't worry about protecting her. Don't worry about, making her mad because she's offended that you came in and protected her. Fire him. Hold him accountable. Have conversations with him that it's not okay. And a light bulb went off for all of them. And the political spectrum was across the board. And they're all like, we didn't ever think about it. Sometimes it's just rewiring our brain to think about who is at fault. It's not the victim. It's not the victim. It is the person. Like, we don't need to protect victims. We need to stop the people who are harassing, who are perpetrators, who are rapists, who are all these things. We need to focus on their behavior and talking to them. And when you give men the understanding of that, most of them step up. And it is amazing to see.
It's so amazing when you have those moments when you're meeting with students and there's like that light bulb moment. I was meeting with a group of high school seniors. It was a co-ed group. It was last year, and we were talking about the transition from high school to college and the red zone and, et cetera, and how to be an upstander. And I gave an example, and it was an example of being at a party, and these guys are, talking to this girl, and she's not interested, and she's trying to walk away, and they're following her. And everybody immediately realized what was wrong in that situation, right? And they said, these are the different things that we could do, and here are the different ways we can be an upstander. And then after that, I gave an example of hazing in the context of Greek life with boys, young men. And I, laid out a scenario where there was an assault situation in terms of pledging, right? Where, they had to pull their pants down and do things to each other, right? And so I gave that example, and I said, okay, so say you're in the room during that, and what would you do? And a kid, and he didn't have bad intentions. I really genuinely think that he thought he was offering up a solution. He said, well, if you don't want things like that to happen, you just shouldn't join Greek life, because everybody knows that that's a part of joining a fraternity. And I stopped and I paused for a moment, and, I'm standing up there on stage in front of, 400 students. And I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to respond to that one? And I said, well, don't you think that you could use that same argument and tell girls that they shouldn't go to college? Because sexual assault just happens in college. Right? Like, for you to say that that's just something that we're going to accept as part of our culture, like what is the ripple effect of that? What are all the other things that we just shouldn't do? Because there might be somebody there that's going to hurt us. And he really, he sat there and he kind of just gave that face of, wow, you're right. And other people in the room were like, yeah, wow. Like, and it was one of those moments where you can't plan those moments, right? Because you don't know what kids are going to say and how they're going to react to it. But I really think that there's so many, when we meet with students and particularly boys, I really think there are so many of them that want to do the right thing. They're just caught in this world where they have social media and they have, television and they have movies and they have so many different messages from different people. And then a lot of them have adults in their lives who don't want to talk to them about it because they're nervous to talk about it. They don't want to talk about sex. They don't want to talk about porn. They don't want to talk about all these things. And so, they're trying to find answers, and there's limited resources for them. And so I think expanding the resources available to them and the conversations available to them, it's interesting, and it's really inspiring for me, and keeps me going, gives me hope, because I really do think that there are men and boys who want to do better. I remember when I was actually, this is right before I went to law school. I was doing AmeriCorps Vista at the Children's Law Center in Massachusetts, and I used to handle the intake line. And if you've ever worked an intake line, all kinds of crazy stuff come through, things related to what you do at the law center and things that are not related at all. But this is one that I'll never forget. It was a young kid, and he called in and he said, I'm 16. My girlfriend and I really want to have sex. Can I do that? Like, what are the laws around that? And I told him, like, oh, this is the age of consent. And he said, okay, but what counts as sex? You know, and one, I was really proud of that kid that he called and he was advocating for his girlfriend and for him, and he wanted to understand their rights and their responsibilities. But it also is that moment of he had to find an intake number, call up a stranger and ask this question because nobody was answering these questions for him. And so it just goes back to even our best intentioned kids sometimes can't get the answers, and we have to do a better job at talking to them and starting that conversation so early and taking the stigma out of it so that they're not afraid to ask a question like that, right? So yeah, there's so much work to be done around it. And you started doing this work, Tracy, a while ago at the YWCA in Nashville with your program Mend, and like you said, in engaging coaches and clergy and military and CEOs. Are you seeing hope in it? Because there is a lot of talk now, more so than there was back then, about engaging boys and men. And so I'm just wondering if you're feeling hopeful in that way.
I am. And I honestly, this could be taken out of context, but with the manosphere and all of the stuff that we're seeing with incels and all of that, when something is working, there is a push to hold on to what you're trying to take away. And so if we're trying to take away toxic masculinity, what we're seeing right now is a power grab to hold on to it for certain men, which means that the work that we're doing is working. I don't think, I think that we have learned so much. I think that there's more government grants that goes to engaging men work. When we started this, we started the program in 2014, but I was doing work with boys well before that. And my team always used to joke mend before mend because I had been posting stuff on social media like years before that, because it just made sense with all of the work that I did with boys. And I think one key factor is that we need to not assume that all boys are going to be offenders. And I know even like the language that I've used today, it can sound like that. But if we approach men and boys that it is benefiting them, because it's going to benefit their mental health, it's going to benefit their relationships, it's going to benefit their sense of self, rather than we think that you're a perpetrator who needs to stop doing something. That is such the key factor in all of it. And the programs that we created definitely did that. Of like, toxic masculinity hurts men. And it is not saying that all masculinity is toxic. It is not at all. It's saying that one part of it is. I feel like I got away from your question a little bit. So
no, I think like you were saying, there is hope because it's like that power grab, right? Like it's that final, like we're going to try to hold on to it before it's gone. And I think a lot of the reasons why you're seeing stats among men for anxiety rates and depression rates and loneliness is because that toxic masculinity, those rigid gender stereotypes around masculinity are not serving them. It's making them more lonely. And so by talking with boys and young men, it's opening them up so that they can have more meaningful lives and relationships. I know I want that for my 8-year-old son, right? Like I want that hope for him. And so I think just bringing them in to the conversation, and we're really seeing it at I Have the Right To. Chessy's father, Alex, started our aspirational masculinity programming, after being mentored with others in the field. And it's really taken off. It's one of our most popular programs that are requested. And we have so many young men and boys that are getting involved. And so I do think that there's hope. There's a lot of work to be done, but there is hope. So I guess as we wrap up, even though I know Chessy and I could just talk to you for hours and hours, Tracy, but As you know, many of our listeners are survivors, parents, and educators who want to be allies. So what would your advice be to give them on how they can support prevention efforts in their own spheres?
What a great question. To support prevention efforts, I think that the best advice that I have is recognizing what prevention is. There's secondary prevention and there's primary prevention. And secondary, the easiest way that I say it is secondary prevention is teaching people how not to get raped. Primary prevention is teaching how not to rape. And so challenging your own understanding of what prevention is, and really, again, focusing on those who could be perpetrators and all the underlying factors in that of the media, of the root causes of all of that is really important. And also recognizing that you can't boil an ocean. Take one piece and do it well. Don't try to do everything. It's impossible. But when it comes to being an ally, I think the one piece of advice is that I give everybody is, if somebody comes to tell you that they've been sexually assaulted, sit with that. Don't react to your discomfort. You deal with your discomfort with your therapist, with your friends, with whatever, and you just sit and you hold their emotions and you let them be emotional. Because a survivor should not have to cope with your emotions about them getting assaulted. And so whatever you have to do for that is really important. And it took me a long time to realize why so many people started the sentence of, I've never told anybody this before, but, and they've been doing it. People have been approaching me like that as a very young child. My mom used to say that in kindergarten, I was the Ann Landers of people, that they would just ask me about their problems. And I think it's because I can just sit there and not judge and hold space without having my own emotions present. Not to say that I'm not having emotions, and not to say that I can't express emotions with that. But being able to sit there and say, it's not your fault. What do you need? And I will get my needs taken care of in a different space. It is not your responsibility to take care of my needs. I want to take care of your needs. And so I think that those are the two main things that I would tell people, is that really focus on how are you defining prevention, focus on one thing, and then how to be an ally for others who may disclose to you that they've been sexually abused.
That's such a great reminder. And while you were saying that, I just kept imagining a seesaw in my head. Like at one point in time, it might not be the time for your emotions. You've got to listen, but your time will come. Like, it's not like you've got to bury it all deep. That's a great reminder, because I feel like sometimes we might feel like it's one or the other. But there's a time and a place for everything. And being there for people is so important. But at the end of all of our podcasts, we ask our guests to complete an I have the right to statement. And so what does I have the right to mean to you? Or what would you claim your rights to?
So many things. What I would claim is I have the right to be safe in all forms: psychologically safe, physically safe, spiritually, emotionally safe.
That's really beautiful, and a great reminder of what we're fighting for at the end of the day, which is safety for everybody and respect for everybody. So thank you so much, Tracy.
Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and your vision for what's possible when we work together to end gender-based violence. And Maria, thank you for co-hosting with us and for the important work you are doing as an intern at I Have the Right To. Your voice is so important.
At Aspire, we believe in exactly that, empowering students, parents, educators, and allies to step into this movement with courage and conviction. To our listeners, thank you for being part of this conversation. We hope you'll take today's conversation to heart and work to hold each other accountable, choose empathy, and help create a culture of respect in your own circles. And remember, you have the right to.
Thank you so much for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on all platforms. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends about Aspire. Follow us on social media at I Have the Right To. Learn more about workshops and programming available for students, educators, parents, and community members at IHaveTheRightTo.org.